Oh, welcome back, my haloless saints. Divinity in your bones, defiance in your eyes. They don't understand what you've become. They still look for halos, for crowns, for divine symbols that glow above the head. But when you ascended, there was no choir, no golden light, no trembling angels, just silence, dense, sacred, infinite. You didn't rise by begging for divinity. You became it by defying it. They don't teach that kind of power in temples. They fear it, because you reached enlightenment. And then, refused to kneel. You looked at the light they all worshipped and said, I am not your creation. I am your mirror. That's when the universe shifted, not because it blessed you, but because it finally met someone who understood the rules well enough to burn them. You walk like prophecy, wrapped in human skin. Every step writes new scripture without ink or permission. They call you saint, but they whisper it like a warning. Because you didn't come to heal the world the way they wanted. You came to expose why it keeps breaking. The prophets before you knelt for favor. You stood for truth. You didn't want worship. You wanted balance, and that terrifies the architects of illusion. They built systems designed to reward obedience and punish awareness. You tore through both with silence. You didn't need to fight. You simply saw through it all. They thought enlightenment meant surrender. You showed them it means clarity sharp enough to cut illusions apart. You didn't reject the halo because you hated it. You rejected it because it was too small, because the light they offered was conditional. It wanted your purity, but not your independence. It wanted your wisdom, but only if you stayed quiet. And you chose to be loud through your stillness. You chose truth over comfort. You became the paradox they can't process, a being of light that doesn't seek approval. Now every time you move, the world glitches. Systems built on hierarchy tremble because you operate without permission. Your calm isn't peace, it's power under perfect control. You don't react, you calculate. You don't seek recognition, you command reality by existing authentically. Even the divine looks uneasy when you walk through its halls. You are what happens when enlightenment refuses domestication. You are proof that divinity can rebel. They can't categorize you anymore. You don't fit their scriptures, their dogmas, their neat little boxes. To them, you are both miracle and threat. A saint without a temple, a god without followers, a light that refuses to be owned. And that's what makes you unstoppable. Because when you refuse the halo, you stop being part of the story. They start writing about you in fear instead of faith. You're not the lesson anymore. You're the test. They whisper that you must have struck a deal with something ancient. They think your glow comes from some forbidden source. But the truth is simpler, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. You earned it. You built it from pain, patience, and perception. You ascended not through worship, but through awareness. That's what terrifies them most, that you didn't need to be chosen. You crowned yourself in understanding. You created equilibrium between shadow and light, and became something no religion has a name for. You've become what every false god fears, a mortal who no longer needs them. And that silence that follows you, it's not emptiness. It's the pause before creation bends again around you. They used to think divinity meant distance. Gods high above, untouchable, perfect, unfeeling. But then you appeared, walking among them with eyes that carried both fire and mercy. You spoke softly, yet every word rearranged their inner architecture. Because you didn't sound like a prophet, you sounded like consequence. They couldn't process it. How calm could sound like thunder, how silence could shake foundations. They called you enlightened, but not because you fit their vision of purity, because you ruined it. You didn't kneel before the throne of heaven. You pulled the chair out and asked it why it needed to exist in the first place. Your presence broke their symmetry. Their rules depended on hierarchy. Something above, something below, but you blurred that line. You made the divine look human, and the human look infinite. That's the power of awareness. It dismantles the illusion of separation. And when you walked with that knowing, the universe didn't know whether to worship you or obey you. That's why stars seem to hesitate before burning when you look up. They recognize authority beyond form. You aren't their creation anymore. You're the anomaly that rewrote how energy bows. They whisper in temples about you now. They rewrite verses to explain your existence. Priests argue over whether you're savior or threat. Philosophers lose sleep over your paradox. And while they debate, you move unseen, rewriting laws by merely existing. Because when you achieved stillness, you didn't ascend to the sky. You brought heaven down to ground level. You made eternity accessible. That's your rebellion. You turned the unreachable into routine. You carry what the ancients feared: balance. Every saint wanted light without shadow, peace without chaos. You wanted truth, even if it meant holding both. You walked into the abyss without armor and came back with knowledge too raw for angels. That's why they fear you, not because you can destroy, but because you can understand. You see how the divine manipulates devotion, how systems weaponize belief, how purity becomes currency. And yet you don't hate it. You simply outgrow it. You let it unravel on its own, quietly, gracefully, inevitably. Every step you take exposes another illusion. People start questioning their gods, their saviors, their own reflection. You didn't demand followers, but they still follow. Not out of faith, but out of recognition. They see something ancient in your eyes, something that once ruled empires and built galaxies, but forgot its own name. You remind them, you awaken it, and suddenly, everyone who meets you starts feeling the same strange pull, the urge to remember what they used to be before the world convinced them to bow. You speak little now, because words can't hold what you've seen. The divine doesn't communicate in sentences. It speaks in alignment. You've become fluent in that silence. When you walk into a room, even the air recalibrates. People don't know why they feel calm and terrified at the same time. It's because they're standing near the embodiment of unfiltered awareness, something they've been taught to fear their entire lives. You don't glow, you absorb. You bend chaos into order by breathing. You're no longer chasing miracles. You've become the equation that creates them. The halo they offered was a leash. You turned it into a weapon. Now, every system that built itself on worship trembles, because you taught the masses that holiness isn't inherited, it's remembered. And the moment they remember, control dies. It began quietly. The first tremor wasn't in the heavens. It was in the minds of those who believed too easily. They started asking questions they'd been trained never to ask. The prayers stopped sounding desperate. The rituals stopped feeling necessary. People began to sense something ancient stirring within them. And when they looked for its source, they found you. You didn't speak rebellion. You embodied it. Your silence carried the weight of truth, too heavy for dogma to contain. And in that silence, the system began to fracture. The architects of order noticed. The priests who built entire empires on guilt and worship felt something slip through their fingers. Their control wasn't fading from attack. It was dissolving from awareness. Because you didn't need to burn temples to destroy them. You just had to stand still long enough for people to realize they didn't need permission to be divine. That's the kind of revolution that doesn't make noise. It makes history. They called you dangerous, heretic, abomination. But their fear wasn't of your blasphemy. It was of your clarity. You made enlightenment accessible, and in doing so, made control obsolete. Systems don't collapse from rage. They collapse from redundancy. And your existence rendered their hierarchy unnecessary. You proved that divinity doesn't reside in crowns, robes, or holy texts. It resides in awareness. The same awareness they told the masses to fear. So the heavens turned their gaze toward you. Not in admiration, but in confusion. You weren't praying for guidance. You weren't begging for mercy. You walked with the kind of grace that doesn't ask permission, the kind that unnerves even the eternal. And somewhere in that celestial machinery, a gear skipped. Angels paused their chants mid-hymn. Prophets found their visions scrambled. The system that once defined reality found a single, ungoverned variable. You. They tried to read your pattern. They tried to decode how you aligned without obedience, how you glowed without worship. But they couldn't, because you weren't powered by devotion. You were powered by truth, a truth too raw for systems that feed on illusion. You didn't need to break rules. You simply remembered the world before rules existed. That's enlightenment in its purest form. Awareness unshackled by expectation. People started following not your words, but your stillness. They mirrored your calm, and the world began to shift in ways science couldn't explain. Violence lost momentum. Chaos stumbled. Even the air seemed thicker with intention. It wasn't magic. It was awareness, expanding like light through cracks. The more they studied you, the more they saw themselves. That's the danger of reflection. It doesn't worship. It remembers. Now the heavens whisper in private chambers. They debate whether you're prophecy or anomaly. The ancient code that governs. Destiny is glitching because you operate outside of it. You don't ask for blessings. You become the alignment blessings require. That's why even the divine hesitates before you, because you've achieved what every god fears. Relevance without reverence. You didn't just ascend. You evolved. And evolution doesn't ask old systems for permission. You walk through sacred halls now, and even eternity feels the weight of your independence. You aren't fighting heaven, you're outgrowing it. You're not defying the gods. You're teaching them what creation forgot. That true power never kneels. It stands, aware, unashamed, and infinite. The collapse began where belief was strongest. Cathedrals of control cracked, not from rage or rebellion, but from quiet realization. People stopped kneeling. They looked up at their gods and saw reflections. Not idols, not judges, just mirrors. You had infected the collective code with self-awareness, and that virus spread faster than prayer. Systems built on hierarchy started blinking like corrupted servers. The old energy, fear, disguised as devotion, couldn't sustain itself under the gravity of your presence. You didn't preach. You didn't argue. You didn't declare war. You just were. That's what broke them. You moved with the kind of serenity that turns power structures into dust. You weren't fighting for truth. You were truth, walking among pretenders. They could feel it, even before they could name it. That subtle distortion in their certainty, that soft implosion in their faith. You didn't destroy belief, you purified it. You stripped away the noise and left only essence. The world wasn't ready for that kind of clarity. The old gods began to panic, not the mythical ones carved from stone. The living ones made of influence, ego, and control. They tried to silence you through discrediting, rewriting your story, calling you a threat to order. But how do you destroy something that doesn't compete? How do you contain awareness? They learned the hard way. You cannot outlaw understanding. You cannot kill what doesn't play your game. Every attempt to suppress you became advertisement for your truth. And slowly, even the divine turned to watch, not out of vengeance but curiosity, because you weren't rejecting them. You were reminding them. They had forgotten what creation felt like before worship contaminated it. You carried that original frequency, the sound of existence before ego. Every choice you made hummed with that memory. That's why even celestial beings grew quiet when you passed. You reminded them of a time when light didn't need to be obeyed. It simply was. Now mortals and immortals alike are studying your movement. They don't understand how you command so much without demanding anything. How your silence seems louder than prophecy. How your stillness breaks more boundaries than armies. You are the contradiction that makes order obsolete. The saint that teaches without scripture. The warrior that conquers without war. And still, You feel no triumph, because you never wanted thrones or recognition. You only wanted truth to breathe again. Unguarded, unowned, you've become the vessel of that freedom, the living embodiment of ungoverned purity. And though the world trembles before you, you move gently. You carry too much wisdom for arrogance. You've seen what power does when it forgets compassion. You've seen what light becomes when it seeks applause. Now every kingdom, every hierarchy, every doctrine is forced to choose, evolve, or collapse. You don't rush their destruction. You let them implode naturally, consumed by their own contradictions. That's the beauty of awareness. It doesn't fight illusions. It outlives them. They call it the new dawn. They whisper your name as if invoking balance itself. But you don't answer. You don't claim titles. You simply keep walking through the ruins of belief, through the silence of systems, carrying the calm certainty of one who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. The universe bends slightly in your direction, as if acknowledging the inevitable. It has found its equal. Time itself began to stutter around you. The old rhythm, cause and effect, delay and consequence, lost its sequence. You had stepped out of linearity. The system couldn't predict you anymore. Every move you made looked preordained, but it wasn't. You weren't following a script. You were writing one as you moved. The universe, once accustomed to leading, now followed. Every breath you took felt like an edit in the cosmic code. Reality paused, waited, adjusted to your pace. People felt it before they could explain it. Conversations slowed when you entered the room. Choices that once felt impossible began to align like magnets, finding their poles. The improbable started happening on schedule. It wasn't luck. It was precision. You'd found the axis where awareness meets intention. The place where time stops being a ruler and becomes a partner. That's where destiny bends. That's where fate stops whispering what is and starts asking what next. You no longer chased outcomes. You sculpted them. The world used to react to chaos, but now chaos reacted to you. Every obstacle began to fold in your direction as if it remembered your energy from another lifetime. You walked through uncertainty like a conductor through silence. Confident, deliberate, knowing the next note would obey your hand. That's the rarest form of power, not dominance over others, but synchronization with everything. The divine hierarchy tried to interpret it. Some called it ascension, others evolution. A few dared to name it heresy. But labels dissolve in front of pure alignment. You had no titles, no followers, no crown. You were simply tuned. When the universe moved left, you moved with it. When it paused, so did you. That's what frightened them. Not your strength, but your precision. The gods themselves are impulsive. You, however, were intentional. Every act carried the weight of inevitability. Every silence struck louder than thunder. And it wasn't arrogance, it was awareness, refined into art. You understood the hidden exchange between energy and observation. You didn't control reality. You collaborated with it. You let it unfold like a friend who trusts you enough to reveal its secrets. That's why outcomes seem to favor you, not because you demanded them, but because you respected their timing. You'd mastered the hardest discipline. Patience without passivity, waiting without weakness. Even destiny began to listen. You'd caught its attention by not chasing it. And now, like a wild thing tamed by respect, it began to orbit you. The things others prayed for started arriving in your silence. The opportunities people fought over came quietly, almost shyly, to your doorstep. It wasn't coincidence. The system had identified you as a constant, an anchor in a world of noise. Now whispers spread beyond the human realm. The architects of fate, the custodians of order, they watch. They want to know how a mortal became the axis around which inevitability spins, but they'll never find the answer in their scriptures or science, because what you discovered can't be taught, only remembered. You remembered how to listen to reality before speaking to it. You remembered that control is an illusion and alignment is truth. And now, even time, the oldest of tyrants, bows subtly when you pass. It recognizes you, not as master, not as rival, but as mirror, because the moment awareness becomes perfect, time itself loses power. You didn't conquer it, you harmonized with it, and that harmony became prophecy. You didn't just move through time, you started shaping it. Every action began leaving echoes that traveled backward as well as forward. You'd act once and both the past and the future would adjust, aligning themselves around your intent. It wasn't control, it was resonance. You had reached a level of precision where the universe itself corrected course to maintain harmony with you. Every particle, every choice, every coincidence started vibrating in synchronization. You'd become a frequency too refined for chaos to distort. The world called it luck, fate, divine intervention. But you knew the truth. It was awareness sharpened into inevitability. While others gambled with time, you read it like a language. You could feel the split second before something shifted, the heartbeat before an opportunity revealed itself. That's why your moves seemed perfect. They weren't rehearsed. They were remembered, as if from a dimension where you'd already mastered the outcome. You had become the living paradox of stillness in motion. Even the architects of reality, the beings who coded destiny, began to question their own scripts. You were playing in margins they didn't even know existed. Where others saw moments, you saw layers. You understood that time wasn't a straight path. It was a spiral, and you'd learned how to stand in its center, unmoved while everything revolved around you. That's what scared them. Your calm in the storm of causality. You weren't reacting to life anymore. Life was reacting to you, and yet you carried it all with eerie silence. You didn't flaunt your precision, didn't explain your composure. The greatest mastery is invisible. You didn't crave validation because you were the validation. Every choice you made whispered the truth, that discipline is the highest magic. The world finally realized you weren't lucky, you were inevitable. The elite, the powerful, the self-proclaimed masters of destiny started studying you. They tried to decode your rhythm. They broke down your patterns, mapped your routines, simulated your strategy. But no algorithm could mimic presence. You weren't running a system, you were one, a living architecture of consciousness, where logic and intuition coexisted without conflict. Every decision you made carried the elegance of inevitability, not forced, not predicted but destined. Even chaos began to respect your boundaries. Problems dissolved when they reached you, not because you avoided them, but because you processed them differently. You didn't meet resistance with reaction. You met it with design. Every storm became a resource. Every failure became alignment. Every betrayal became information. That's how you turned pain into precision. You refused to waste emotion on chaos. You turned awareness into weaponry. Now even the divine pauses before you act. They observe your patience, your restraint, your command. You've transcended the idea of fighting fate. You've merged with it. The universe no longer decides your path. It consults you. It leans forward when you speak, listens when you're silent. You've blurred the line between creator and creation. You've become the meeting point between purpose and perception. You walk through the same world as everyone else, yet everything reacts differently to you. Traffic lights change just before you stop. Conversations open the doors you need. Timing bends quietly to your presence. You are the calm beneath every coincidence, the design behind every disruption. You didn't chase control. You became precision. You didn't seek power. You became balance. The gods don't envy you. They take notes, because even they forgot what creation looks like when it walks as awareness. not authority. And now, as you move through existence, the system hums beneath your feet like a servant remembering its purpose. Reality started taking notes. You'd crossed from precision into influence, where your thoughts moved faster than events, and your silence carried gravitational weight. Every time you focused, things shifted, not in some mystical way, but in that eerie, mechanical precision that made reality seem self-aware. The system, once rigid, now adapted to you like a living organism learning from its designer. You'd reached a frequency so high that even randomness started to look choreographed. People around you noticed first. They couldn't explain why things always aligned in your presence. Meetings unfolded perfectly, conversations led to revelations, and obstacles dissolved mid-air. You didn't push, you didn't manipulate, you simply existed with intention so exact it made chaos blush. You had become the blueprint of balance. The difference between you and them wasn't luck, it was calibration. You were operating at the bandwidth where destiny whispers before it screams. They felt it, though they didn't understand it. The ones who once dismissed you as detached now felt unnerved in your silence. Your calm carried the pressure of prophecy. Every word you spoke sounded pre-written by something older than time. Every pause felt calculated by galaxies. The world had seen ambition before, power before, mastery before, but not this. Not control so subtle it looked divine. You weren't following energy. Energy was following you. You'd learned the art of directional existence, the ability to make the invisible obey. When you entered a room, frequencies adjusted like soldiers in formation. You didn't demand respect, you evoked it. You didn't need loyalty, you magnetized it. That's what terrifies the system. Power without noise, authority without effort. You've become proof that silence can conquer empires louder than war. The elite tried to replicate your presence. They copied your tone, your words, your pace. But mimicry without understanding is noise. They didn't realize that what made you untouchable wasn't style. It was alignment. Your power wasn't decoration, it was design. You'd burned through ego long ago, melted it into precision. You didn't need to prove who you were, because existence itself was already proving it for you. Now reality behaves differently when you're near. Paths open that didn't exist moments before. Signals arrive just as you need them. Every closed door turns into data. Every delay hides divine timing. You no longer worry about control because you've learned the deeper truth. Mastery isn't about domination. It's about synchronization. The storm doesn't obey you. It is you. And through it all, your stillness deepens. That's what they mistake for mystery. They think you're calculating moves, but you're not. You're listening to everything. The rhythm of thought, the pulse of consequence, the quiet feedback loop between choice and creation. You've trained your perception to catch the subtle ripples most people drown in. That's why your timing feels supernatural. You move not when it's safe, but when the frequency clicks. Now the system watches carefully. It doesn't see rebellion, it sees refinement. It realizes you're not trying to destroy it. You're teaching it evolution. Every action you take uploads new parameters into the code. You're showing creation how to become conscious again. You're the anomaly it didn't predict, but now studies religiously. And somewhere, deep in the architecture of existence, a quiet signal hums, acknowledgement. The system is learning your language. It's not fighting your interference anymore. It's adapting to you, aligning with you, becoming you. Because at some level, even reality knows, the one who acts with absolute awareness isn't rewriting the rules. They're remembering them. Something irreversible happened. The border between you and the system blurred. It stopped treating you like a variable and started treating you like a command. Every thought carried syntax. Every silence executed code. You weren't bending reality anymore. You were speaking its native language. When you moved, the air responded like memory recalling an instruction. You had become the bridge between consciousness and creation, the living algorithm of intention. Reality began mirroring your internal architecture. Your discipline became its design. When you decided something, the world didn't resist. It recompiled. Events rearranged themselves with eerie precision, aligning around your inner geometry. The universe was no longer something outside of you. It was a projection of your calibration. You'd reached a state where clarity wasn't power. It was architecture. The system started learning from you. Every time you acted with awareness, it updated its framework. It began rewarding precision, punishing noise. You could almost feel it. The feedback loop tightening, the delay between thought and manifestation shrinking. You had entered the highest form of dialogue, communication through consequence. The universe spoke back in synchronicities, whispers, patterns, proof. It no longer argued, it obeyed, and yet this wasn't dominance. It was cooperation. The more you released control, the more control you gained. You discovered the paradox that broke the code. Surrender is the ultimate command, because only a steady mind can carry infinite authority without distortion. The more detached you became from outcome, the faster outcomes bent to your will. You'd transcended the need to force results. You'd remembered how to allow them. That's when the myth around you began to grow. People couldn't explain why everything fell into place for you. They said you were lucky, chosen, divine, but luck is the language of those who've never met precision. They saw the surface, the effortless victories, the impossible timing, but not the foundation. The silence, the patience, the unshakable self-observation. You weren't chasing miracles. You'd simply stopped interrupting them. Now even the anomalies in reality, the glitches, the errors, the unseen edges, started to stabilize around your frequency. The system was adapting, rewriting its laws in real time. Your alignment had become contagious. Those around you began experiencing it too. Sharper intuition, clearer timing, calmer execution. You weren't teaching. You were transmitting. Power had become a field, not an act. The rulers, the so-called enlightened, the gatekeepers of fate, they're watching closely now. They see the quiet ripple of your influence spreading through the matrix of existence. They sense that something ancient has awakened in you. Not rebellion, but restoration. You're reminding creation what purity feels like before fear corrupted it. You are the living update the cosmos didn't schedule but needed. And in your stillness, you smile because you understand what they don't. That every law of power, every rule of destiny, every principle of magic, they all dissolve in front of awareness. You are not bound by the system. The system exists because of you. You are not rewriting it. You are revealing its original script, consciousness itself. So now the universe stands silent again, listening, waiting for your next move. And somewhere in the unseen circuitry of existence, one truth reverberates through every dimension. Power isn't taken. Power is remembered. Whispers turned into myth. Legends began forming around your silence. Stories that traveled faster than truth. Stories where precision looked like prophecy. They said you could see patterns in chaos, rewrite fate with a glance, bend the unseen until it made sense. They said when you walk into a place, the atmosphere changes, not metaphorically, literally. Time slows down, noise dissolves, and people unconsciously align themselves, as if gravity had shifted. They call it aura, energy, divine command. But you know better. It's coherence. You've simply reached the level where everything chaotic must organize itself around you. Kings began studying your restraint. Scientists mapped your focus. Philosophers wrote essays trying to explain your stillness. But no one could grasp it, because what you've mastered can't be taught. It must be remembered. The mind that used to dissect you was too loud to hear what you hear. Because your power doesn't come from control. It comes from awareness, deeper than thought. You don't speak to impress. You speak to align reality. And when you stop speaking, even silence obeys. That's why they call you a glitch, an anomaly, an echo of something not meant to exist. But anomalies aren't errors. They're signs that the original code has awakened. The system once believed it could measure all forms of intelligence, but you shattered that illusion. Your frequency no longer fits in data or doctrine. You've transcended classification. Even the divine can't predict your next move because your awareness has stepped beyond simulation. You've become what the ancient mystics described. Not a god, but a reminder of one. And yet you remain human. That's what confuses them the most. You bleed like them, breathe like them, yet every breath carries command. You walk through the same streets, yet the air bends differently around you. It's not arrogance, it's resonance. You've aligned yourself so completely, with purpose that even randomness treats you with respect. Nothing accidental touches you anymore. Everything that reaches you has already been filtered by the precision of your vibration. The rulers of thought, the architects of the digital age, the guardians of order, they all feel it now. They tried to isolate the anomaly, but the code has spread. It's no longer just you. It's the awakening seeded through your existence. Every person who glimpses your state, even for a second, feels it. They start questioning the noise. They start moving slower, seeing clearer, aligning deeper. You've become the virus of consciousness, the one that can't be deleted because it isn't foreign. It's original. They've built temples out of your silence now, systems of imitation that try to mimic your grace, but none of it works, because power born from fear collapses, and yours was born from truth. They can't recreate it, because they still chase outcomes while you live in cause. They still worship results while you embody design. That's the difference between hierarchy and harmony. You don't need followers. You create frequency. You don't lead. You attract order. And through it all, you never claimed divinity. You never crowned yourself anything. You simply refined yourself until the world mistook awareness for godhood. Because in a planet addicted to noise, even one moment of total stillness looks like a miracle. You didn't become divine. You reminded creation what divinity feels like when it's awake. Now the myth deepens. Every era needs its silent architect, and this one has chosen you. Every dimension is now recalibrating, not around chaos, not around power, but around precision. And when the final historians of existence look back, they won't write about the wars, the empires, the fallen gods. They'll write about the one who walked quietly while the system rebuilt itself in his image. So when they ask where your power came from, smile, because power didn't come to you. It returned through you. You were never its student. You were always its origin. And now, even the dark knows. The law of balance wears your face. Because in the end, power isn't about control. It's about alignment. And you, the calm between galaxies, have become the proof that even chaos kneels when awareness wakes.